lots to unpack here, both legally and politically. So to help us with that, I'm joined in the studio by lawyer Asher Honickman. He is a partner at the Toronto firm Matthews Abogado, and Marieke Walsh. She is a reporter for iPolitics and appears on Power and Politics here on CBC News Network. So Marieke, I'll start with you. What is your main takeaway after hearing from Gerald Butts today?
My main takeaway is that there are more questions.
Yeah.
And Gerald Butts was not able to speak to a lot of the key meetings that Jody Wilson-Raybould had in that arc of time, in those 4 months where she says she was subject to undue pressure. He wasn't subject to the meeting with the Prime Minister, with the Privy Council clerk, with the other senior level PMO staffers. And because of that, he wasn't able to address whether or not some of those conversations around partisan implications of the possible jobs, the election implications. He can't say whether or not those conversations happened. He could only say and defend the character of the people involved in those conversations. And so that really still needs to be addressed.
And so, Asher, the whole question has been about this from a legal perspective, about whether or not Jody Wilson-Raybould was inappropriately pressured to politically interfere in this SNC-Lavalin case, and Gerald Butts completely denying that today. What did you make of that part of his testimony?
Well, the interesting thing is, I mean, first of all, I think I said this last time I was on, there's no such thing as inappropriate pressure. There's either pressure or there's not pressure. Pressure by its very nature is inappropriate when we're talking about constitutional conventions. What's interesting about Jerry Butts' testimony is that he's not denying that there were something like 11 different meetings that took place. He's basically saying, I have a different understanding of what took place at some of those meetings that I was privy to, and I don't believe the other meetings would have gone the way she's saying, because I don't think those people are bad people. But the very fact that that many meetings took place is itself suggestive of pressure, and he's sort of dividing it by the number of months and saying, well, it's 2 a month or whatever it is. But the fact remains that if you're having that many meetings and there's no new facts coming to light, what is occurring at those meetings other than pressure?
And so go ahead, Marieke.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And he compared the number of meetings, which was about 20 on this file, with, he said, I think at least 100 in a month on another file. And that's an interesting comparison. One of my questions is whether that's a fair comparison, because he's comparing to files like the NAFTA renegotiation and the purchase of a pipeline. Those are both firmly in the realm of policy and politics, whereas this was in the realm of the AG, which is an independent position around the cabinet table. And so I wasn't sure that that was a fair comparison. I think Janice talked about muddying the waters. It certainly, I think, it does raise more questions. It's their version of the context that shows it wasn't a lot of pressure. But I think to your point, there were those meetings.
And Asher, one of the key points that I believe it was Jagmeet Singh raised, and I believe it was Lisa Raitt raised, is that Jagmeet Singh basically said he thinks it defies credulity, or just is unbelievable, that Gerald Butts says that he did not know that the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, had come to a final decision on whether or not to pursue this plea deal with SNC-Lavalin until last week. What do you make of that?
Well, just to be clear, the issue, and I think Elizabeth May was touching on this, the issue is not her decision to pursue a plea deal. The issue would be her decision to take over the prosecution and then pursue a plea deal. The Director of Prosecutions has already decided they're not going to pursue a plea deal. She's reviewed that, and her decision is basically, I'm not going to take over this prosecution. This looks like what it should be. The Director of Prosecutions is doing their job. They've appropriately weighed the factors, etc. She can have then discussions with the government about that. And obviously, maybe 1 or 2 discussions make sense in that context. But again, 20 different discussions over months doesn't make sense. And I agree, it does strain credulity to suggest that at this point, after months, she still hasn't come to a decision. She came to a decision as soon as she said, I'm not going to take over this prosecution.
What about him? What about Jerry Butts saying, look, as far as I know, and maybe you can help us with this plea deal or this deferred prosecution agreement, that can be considered, or that can be an option right up to a verdict. Is that true? And if that's the case, then he's saying, why wouldn't she just, get some outside counsel from someone like former Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin and just sort of consider that option?
Right. So the statute doesn't set out a timeline for when an attorney general can take over a prosecution. The deferred prosecution agreement provisions of the criminal code don't really set out a timeline either. So he's correct in the sense that if new information came to light that was relevant, that changed her calculus in terms of whether she should take over that prosecution or whether she should be pursuing a deferred prosecution agreement once she did take it over. That is technically true, that if new information is coming to light, that can be relevant. But he also said that he doesn't know of any new information that came to light. So the issue is not, has she made a final decision yet, because we haven't gone to verdict yet. The issue is she has said she's not going to do this. The presumption is that decision is final unless there is some new evidence that would change that analysis.
Is there anything, Asher, do we just not know that because there just isn't new information, or do we not know that because we're still in the thick of this prosecution?
It could be both. I mean, Marieke might know better than me. I can say for myself, I'm scratching my head thinking, what new information could there be?
Right.
It seems like all the facts were in, all the analysis was in by September.
Marieke, let me ask you. Oh, you want to make a point? Go ahead.
I believe the one thing they said was that there was a letter sent that they wanted it reviewed. There was some letter sent in that time period, but
Right.
I'm not precise on that.
Let me ask you a little bit about the explanation that Gerald Butts gave for resigning. What did you make of that?
I think, like Janice, I'm not sure it was entirely clear to me. I think that him resigning did free him up to speak at committee. I think it would have been more difficult for him to speak at committee and to do so freely if he was still in the PMO, if he was still also advising Trudeau. So, that's what he said in his letter, that he doesn't believe what Jody Wilson-Raybould said actually happened, and he's not apologizing for that, but he needs to resign in order to properly defend himself.
And Asher, what do you? I don't know if this is one of those political/legal questions. What did you make of his explanation for resigning?
It was a bit odd from my perspective. This is more my perspective as a layperson, just because I'm thinking, okay, he's saying he's resigned because he doesn't want to be seen to be favored by the Prime Minister. He's also saying that he didn't really know that Jody Wilson-Raybould was going to make all the allegations she was going to make about being shuffled out until recently. I think he said at one point, it was only a week ago, that he really learned what she was really alleging. So then why resign?
Okay, so let's just listen to the clip, and then we can just talk briefly out of it. So this is, I believe this is a clip it's in his opening statement. So let's just listen. This is about why he says he resigned. So here it is.
The Prime Minister and I have been close friends for almost 30 years. That is well known. If I stayed on, his actions or inactions toward me could have been used to accuse him of playing favorites, that he was choosing his best friend over a minister. I could not allow our friendship to be held against him, so resigning was the right and necessary thing to do for the office and for the Prime Minister.
Marieke, what do you make of that?
I mean, I'm not sure. I'm hearing it again after 2.5 hours or 3 hours of testimony. I'm not sure that other people would have seen it that way, but I think they were sensitive to coverage of how close he is to Trudeau. Some people in columns have called him Prime Minister Butts, and so I think that they were very sensitive to that, maybe, but that's not what I was thinking about his resignation.
What do you make, Asher, of so far at least, unless that has changed in the last little while, but I don't think it has, but we are not going to hear from Jody Wilson-Raybould again, that there was a motion that was put forward before the committee. The Liberals, because they're the majority, they have a majority of members on that committee, just to hear her. We've heard from Gerald Butts. Now, people want to hear from Jody Wilson-Raybould. Some people want to hear from her again. People have made the point that we're going to hear from the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, in about 15 minutes. This will be his second appearance, so why not hear from Jody Wilson-Raybould again?
And that's a good question. I was wondering that myself, especially after the committee was so open to letting her speak the first time, giving her quite a bit of leeway to make a long opening statement. I don't think it looks good on the committee that they wouldn't want to bring her back. I seem to recall they were even suggesting last time they would like to have her back to speak on other issues. So I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't the final decision on that matter, that upon further reflection, we've decided to have her back.
Great to have you both. Thank you both very much. Another busy day. Asher Honickman and Marieke Walsh.